Just outside Phoenix, Arizona, stands the Champlin Fighter Museum with its magnificent collection of historic aircraft. Among the many exhibits, this one, a Focke-Wulf Model 190, stands supreme. It's a pristine example of one of the truly great aircraft of the Second World War. Revered by pilots on both sides, the 190, in its various forms, saw service wherever the Luftwaffe fought from 1941 onwards. A remarkable thing about the 190 is that despite its success, it was originally a plane that nobody wanted. Seen rather as an unnecessary insurance policy that would never be called upon. Yet before the war ended, it was to be the backbone of Germany's conventional fighter strength, constantly modified and improved. Adolf Galland, General of Luftwaffe fighters, recommended cancelling all other piston-engined interceptors to concentrate on 190 production. It takes many skills and disciplines to perfect an aircraft like the 190, and in the end it must be the result of team effort. But if any one person can be identified with the success of this model and the drive behind its ultimate adoption by the Luftwaffe, that man was Kurt Tank. Tank had previously designed aircraft for the Focke-Wulf Company when it competed unsuccessfully against the fabled Messerschmitt 109. Certainly by the late 1930s, the 109 was seen as invincible and in no need of replacement for years to come. Light, streamlined, and very effective, the 109 embodied all of the new technology of the day, whereas Tank's less competitive design was a high-wing parasol concept that seemed to belong to an earlier decade. By 1937, large numbers of 109s were being produced for Hitler's Luftwaffe. After the failure of his first fighter, Tank went on to concentrate on other concepts. Very much a leader, he inspired other designers, and as early as 1936, he brought together the talents that produced one of the most advanced airliners of that time. The FW-200 Condor wouldn't have looked out of place as a post-war airliner. In the event, wartime needs overtook the airliner concept, and the FW-200 was pressed into service as a long-range maritime reconnaissance aircraft, which plied the Atlantic, often working in conjunction with U-boat raiders. The 200's only serious flaw was its weak undercarriage. Also typical of Tank's creativity was the FW-189, unofficially referred to as the Owl. The 189 was an army observation design which utilized two small engines to power a shape that resembled an airborne glass house. The Owl provided tremendous strength in what was basically a very light airframe. Much respected by those who flew it, this simple yet honest design would see service throughout the Second World War as probably the best of its type available anywhere. In 1937, the war was still distant, and Germany reveled in its newfound prosperity. The Third Reich had brought order and a renewed sense of national pride to a nation that had suffered harsh treaty conditions after the First World War, followed by a cruel depression. Now there was purpose. There was also planning for a new Germany with wider borders, and planning for a new Luftwaffe. Much of the success of the 109 was due to its Daimler-Benz 600 series engine, a brilliant piece of engineering. It had an inline configuration with 12 cylinders laid out in 2 rows. This followed the thinking of the day that a long, narrow engine offered a more streamlined shape, which in turn would allow the plane to go faster. The 600 series was also used in the Messerschmitt twin-engine fighter, the 110. It offered the same advantages: low drag, higher speed. And as always in the design of fighters, the constant quest was for speed. In 1937, the inline engine was in almost universal use in fighter aircraft. British Hurricanes utilized the Rolls-Royce Merlin, providing a similar combination of a powerful engine and a streamlined airframe. This is the Vought 141, an American pre-war design that was never adopted, but one example was sold to Japan. It was later quite wrongly held that the Empire used it as the basis for its own fighter designs. Rather than using an inline engine, the 141 employed an air-cooled radial concept, with the cylinders arranged in a circle around the crankshaft. Less aerodynamic than the inline, radial engines were nevertheless popular with the American Navy, because they were more reliable and didn't require the added complication of a radiator. They were also shorter, and thus more planes could be carried on the deck of an aircraft carrier. The Pratt & Whitney Company, in particular, continued to develop the radial engine as an alternative to the streamlined water-cooled type. But apart from Navy fighters, their main use was as commercial or bomber aircraft, where the last ounce of speed was not quite so critical. In the early 1930s, some of Pratt & Whitney's sturdy radial engines were sold to Germany, and later were manufactured under license by the BMW company. Despite the success of the Messerschmitt 109, there were still some people in the Luftwaffe who insisted on the need for a second fighter. Daimler-Benz simply couldn't produce more engines, and for this reason a Focke-Wulf design was accepted as a backup, because it utilized a BMW radial, which was less in demand. Kurt Tank and his team had support for their idea from several sources. Earlier there had been the Howard Hughes H-1 Racer. It too utilized a radial engine and so lacked a smooth, pointed shape. But the overall output from the power plant, coupled with the plane's other aerodynamic features, resulted in a formula that still provided one of the fastest aircraft of its time. Clearly, Tank was impressed by the design, which also featured a wide-track undercarriage for safer landings. Hughes personally flew the H-1 on many record-breaking flights, proving that there was a situation where extra horsepower compensated for a lack of aerodynamics. Another successful application of the radial, which Tank would almost certainly have known about, was the early development of Japan's A6M0, produced for the Imperial Navy. This design was still secret in 1937. It used an American-designed cowl which surrounded the engine and provided a limited amount of streamlining. But it derived its speed and maneuverability from its light weight.